Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us this evening for this talk, which is taking place as part of the programming for Syowia Kyambi's exhibition Kaspale, which is on at the Nairobi Contemporary Art Institute until the 30th of June. This evening's conversation will revolve around collaboration between curators and artists, paying specific attention to the conditions in which work gets made, the institutions that one has to move through, navigating these different spaces, their legacies, and what conditions are necessary for work to be made, and how curators and artists can think together for the production and creation of artwork in the short term and in the long term. Thinking about this more as a relationship of thinking together and building together over time. Our speakers this evening will be Syowia Kyambi, the artist, Mareike Spaeth, and Eike Walkenhorst, two curators who worked with Syowia at some important stages in the development of this body of work. Mareike was working at the MARKK Museum in Hamburg in 2019 when project, and Eike worked with Syowia in 2022 at the Max Planck Institute of Empirical Aesthetics, where Origins, one of the installations in the exhibition, was developed. So right before we begin the conversation, I'd like to share a video, just a brief walkthrough of the exhibition, just to give a sense of the work in the exhibition, following which we'll launch right into the conversation. Please note, as the speakers carry on, if you have any questions, please just put them in the chat. We'll be collecting them and we'll bring them up. We'll have a Q&A at the end of the conversation. Thank you.
There we go. I think the video is kind of lagging, so apologies for that. No, there's no sound. It's just a walkthrough, really. The first thing you saw was Kaspale's playground and installation, and now we're getting into the second part of the gallery. And the ceramic work you see in the space is part of Kaspale's ancestors. And Kaspale is a trickster character I created first in the MARKK Museum with my time with Mareike as an intervention into the ethnographic museum and its archive. Which was a bigger project, which we'll probably get into when we talk. Sorry, it's lagging quite a bit. That's another one of Kaspale's ancestors, parts of the sisters. And parts of the twins and the ancient ones. I worked in ceramics for some of these with recycled Dow wood, and some of them with aluminium castings. Ooh, it's very jumpy. And the most recent is the primordials, which is what you're seeing now. They happened like 3 weeks before the show opened in the end of March. And I'm continuing with those still. The ancestors are like an ongoing body of work still. And becoming Kaspale was actually my entry point into meeting and working with Eike at the Max Planck Institute. It's a video film. And Origins is actually the work I produced for the exhibition with Eike, which was first shown at the MARKK Museum for Applied Art in Frankfurt last year in October. And it's like the kind of space I built for where Kaspale comes from, which are kaleidoscopic mangroves, which we can also get into, and also, how do you say, like ancestors created out of oil pastels and screen printing mesh. The fabric is also translucent, so it's like flag material. So it's quite porous. And I guess with my installation process, it's always very site-specific in one sense, in terms of the spatial, the availability of the space, the conditions in the space. I prefer to work with than insist on a frame. We can get into some of that too. I think the purpose of the video was just to give a sense for those of you who are not in Kenya and can't see the show, to get a little bit of a hint of what it's like.
I think having looked at the video, then I'd like to hand over hand over to you, Syowia, Eike, and Mareike. And yeah, please remember to share your questions, your comments, and we will pick them up at the end later on in the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Don. Thanks so much for joining us, everybody. It's really nice to see lots of familiar names and a couple of familiar faces. I think it might be pertinent for each of us to introduce ourselves. I think I don't have to introduce myself so much. For those of you who don't know, I'm an artist. I also run a space called Untethered Magic with Kiva Wangunyu and Kieran Nash, which is a space for process and exchange and a residency space. In the context of Kenya, we don't have a lot of opportunities to have the time and kind of facilitated time and space for research and exchange. The system is very much geared on a commercialized platform for art, and process and research are often like not catered for fully. We don't have a lot of public funding bodies that facilitate that or help facilitate that. So Untethered Magic was birthed as a response to that, but it always starts as a place of home. Eike has visited Untethered Magic. Mareike will hopefully visit soon. And maybe just to share, in my practice, I tend to work specifically with installation and performance. I use performance often to change an installation, but not always. My use of material is rather wide because I tend to use a material that kind of can verbalize the research content of what I'm researching. The things that are repetitive are the use of sisal, the use of clay, sometimes the use of mirror. Mirror is often in play as a way to include the audience and myself in the present time at how things are affected from the past, because a lot of my works deal with historical and archival material. Yeah, I think I'll stop there and pass over the buck to Mareike for self-introduction, sorry.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot to you, Syowia, and also thanks a lot to all the people at the Nairobi Contemporary Art Institute for inviting us tonight to introduce or to talk about Syowia's work and how we work together and how we met. So it's a great pleasure being here, and thanks a lot to everyone for joining. So yeah, my name is Mareike, and I am a social and cultural anthropologist by training, more or less a researcher. I've worked at universities for quite a long time before joining a museum, an ethnographic museum to be specific, for my work. And between 2018 and 2020, I was working at the Museum am Roten Baum, MARKK, which is the ethnographic museum in Hamburg, Germany, north of Germany, and one of the larger ethnographic collections in Germany. I was working there as an assistant curator for the African collection, and that's how I met Syowia, because I was preparing an exhibition on Amani, which is a colonial research institute in northern Tanzania, the Usambara Mountains. And Syowia had been invited to this project to start a work and also like research at the Amani site, which I have never visited myself. So, but then Syowia was also invited to come to Hamburg and work and investigate into that historical collection of objects, subjects, beings from the African continent that now are hosted in the storages and depots of the museum. Yeah, maybe so far for an introduction, because that was our point where our paths crossed.
Eike?
Yeah, also thank you so much, Syowia, and the whole MARKK team for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to meet again in this format and to talk about your work. And also thank you for everybody who are joining the talk today. I'm Eike. I'm a photographer and curator. I work, so that one side of my practice, which is like artistically applied, like way of like working for the ways like the curatorial work, and the curatorial work is mostly executed at the Max Planck Institute for Empirical Aesthetics, where I work as a curator for the residency program Inhabit. I got there doing my studies at the Schule here in Frankfurt, and I actually wrote the concept for this residency program in 2019. And the idea is to invite 92 artists from various disciplines to come to Frankfurt and to work in collaboration or in dialogue with the scientists to bring in different practices and cosmologies and ways of thinking and knowledge production, and then to actually work on a project that is ongoing or a new project. So this is actually how I met Syowia, and which was in 2022, last year, when Syowia was part of the second group of artists coming to Frankfurt in a very, still very new state of the residency program, which also has consequences on the way it's designed and how the culture of the residency program was available. So this is definitely something we will talk about. And yeah, then we did the exhibition together outgoing from the residency, and we're showing Origins, which is also now visible in MARKK. So yeah, and I'm very happy to talk with you about all the different details now.
Yeah, I feel like the work Origins changed a lot from the two spaces. In one sense, at MARKK, it's much more compressed and condensed and feels more immersive in a sense, because there's an actual spiral that you enter and are within. The work has a sound element, and you saw a little bit of it with the fabric and the mangroves and the, how do you say, the Kaspale's ancestors. And in the the MARKK was really a 12-meter by 12-meter approximation type room, and it had a very different like sense or sensibility to it, which was an interesting process as an artist to experience. I think what I'd like to do is share my screen, and hopefully I don't lose all of you. Hi, Mona. Okay. Yeah, okay. So I hope that's okay. And you can still see the image. So these images are not in any order. I kind of started to put together some images that would help us converse around different parts of our concept. I still feel ongoing, and I also feel like the type of relationship we have is one that's continuous and keeps going. Mareike often sends me different masks she finds from other places where she's like, oh, this is reminding me of Kaspale, here, click. And I'm still in conversation with Eike as well. And I feel like that's a very long-term kind of relationship, which I really appreciate in a curatorial artist sense or being. And obviously that's not possible all the time with every project that you do, but it's the kind of relationships I tend to cultivate with curators that I work with that I really admire and appreciate. I think with, there's two thoughts there, and I'm just saying them so you can remind me. One is that process of when I came to the MARKK Museum and Mareike, I felt like the project was kind of not one that you had developed from the onset. It was kind of put into your lap. And there was a question, you know, I was asking you, I said, look, I prefer to work in a way that's process-based, where we keep conversing, but that's much more labor and might not be part of the contract that you kind of signed up for. So, you know, let me know. And I can also just say, okay, here's the output, here you go. And we're done and dusted, right? But I prefer this other way. And luckily, Mareike was very open to that process. And I think with Eike, because you built the Inhabit residency, it's a very different kind of negotiation of exchange anyhow already. I think that platform of conversation is embedded in the program, whereas curating as a museum for a specific show is kind of different. And maybe it's also important to share that the Amani project, I was very reluctant to bring materials from Tanzania back inside of an ethnographic space in contemporary time into Hamburg in Germany. I find it quite a violent act. So I was traveling and stopped in Hamburg and met the director and was like, is it possible? And I think the similarity is that the residency, facilitation of residency was quite new in the MARKK Museum as well. So I'm going to skip this slide and come back to it, but I just wanted to talk about space because, Eike, you mentioned, you know, facilitation, what is actually required when working collaboratively or working with an artist or hosting an artist. And I think you had some comments to do with, how do you say, like, not honesty, it's another word. It's hospitality.
Yeah. Maybe a comment on your first thoughts, if this is okay.
Sure.
No, because
absolutely.
also when I was thinking about also the Kaspale project and the two different institutions and the beginning of the Kaspale project and maybe the latest moment of the Kaspale project, the origins work, like, I mean, the MARKK Museum and the Max Planck Institute is complete different institutions with different politics, requirements, infrastructures, logics, bureaucracies. That's for sure. And they might also share some institutional overlaps, but maybe there's one aspect that they in particular share in terms of space and artist collaborations that, and maybe Mareike will correct me when I'm wrong, but like also historically, probably the museum has no big experience in working directly with artists and have artists around in the institution as like a foreign agency that brings in a different perspective, that asks questions in regard of the mandate, of the mission, of the material that is inhabiting in the institution. In the same way as the Max Planck Institute, it was not. It's a research institution which is very hierarchical, and so was not designed to inhabit artists from the first place, but it landed. So I think in both cases, artists landed at a certain moment, and as as like a, yeah, I think the term foreign agency is really productive because it's really about yeah, like reacting to like a very solid system that is now in question for a certain time, for like in temporal sense. So I think this also brings in question the way of how to negotiate spaces for the individual who is coming into this system of the institution.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, when you came, it was like the first political thing on the table. You need space, and
Yeah.
And you were the fourth artist in the residency program, and the others had like a completely different practice. So now the institution was confronted with a complete different agenda. So that was the first thing, right? So space
Maybe
was
just to give some framework. I arrived, and first I have to also position the framework of arriving in February in Germany, and the institution is still very strict with the pandemic. Right. So people were also not in their offices. So an opportunity for kind of a conversation with scientists was quite like limiting already. There were things in place that were, again, working against that in a sense. When I arrived, I had a shared room, which I was fine with, but I couldn't move a table, you know, to make space. And then I got put in like a cubicle where you stretch out your arms and you're touching the wall. And I'm like, you do realize I do sculptural work and large scale drawing, but this is not going to work, you know. And we really had to fight for the room that you see the image of in front of you. And luckily now I feel like also it was a worthy fight, because I hope they've still kept it for artists, and it became like an official room. No,
it's your official studio now. That
yeah,
was
fantastic.
Yeah.
So that was
like, yeah,
worth all the kind of bureaucratic legwork to make this like, hey, this needs to be permanent. This is like a requirement. I just wanted to tap onto one thing. I know, Mareike, you also want to speak. There's one thing as well I've noticed. I think with ethnographic museums, what's been happening is that there's been like a deployment of asking artists to respond to the ethnographic collection. And that's relatively new deployment, which when I was at the Smithsonian African Art Museum back in 2017 for a fellowship, I was asking myself, you know, there was contemporary works next to ethnographic works. And there's this move to get artists to respond to these objects, but like the contemporary African Art Museum wasn't really pushed. It always came from the birthing of an ethnographic space. And even the Nairobi National Museum now is also like coming from a place of starting as an ethnographic point. It was built with that in mind, and then became has a contemporary wing, but that was also only in the last, I don't know, 15 years. And I was asking myself in the Smithsonian, you know, would you have would you go to the Native Indian Folkloric Museum that's right around the corner and have Andy Warhol's can soup image, because it's all dealing with tinned can products? And my gut feeling is the answer is no. So why is it happening with contemporary African art? And then the burden of working in an ethnographic museum, you could say, okay, I take the position of not working in that space, right? But then in my mind, I'm always thinking, okay, I could either say no, or I could actually say, yeah, let's figure out how to intervene in a like smart way where things can actually shift, because I think we're still far away from a deeper discourse about contemporary African art not being connected to contemporary Africa, not being connected to ethnographic departure or primitivism or naive art. It's a very wide thing I'm throwing out there.
Yeah, just to pick up some of the thoughts and ideas that now sparked in my head from what the two of you said is, first of all, I'd like to come back to that picture we are looking at now, the one on the left-hand side, because I mean, so what we see here is the window of a shop in like the very posh shopping era in Hamburg, and where we have taken this picture symbolically because it somehow shows that Hamburg is a city that until today more or less also prides itself in its colonial history and the grandeur that the city maybe reached during that era and departing from that. And the Ethnographic Museum is part of that history. But luckily, the museum has lately, since the mid-2010s, decided to take a more self-reflexive and self-critical stand on its own history, on the history of the city, the interconnectedness with colonialism, and also like the collecting itself. That has been marked by a new director. And this is also like, for me, was the point where I thought, okay, this is an interesting project to join. And this is also where the museum opened itself to projects that critically engage with that history, critically engage with how the history, like how the collection has been dealt with in the past, and inviting these projects and residencies like the one you then embarked on, Syowia. I think that working like with contemporary artists and displaying art and also looking at the collection as art is something that has once and again happened in the history of an ethnographic museum, but like in different perspective and in different ways. So artists have been invited. There have been shows showing contemporary artists from, well, not only the African continent, because it's the collection like covers like the whole, well, all regions from the world, let's put it like that. But I think that inviting artists to become of the project, to critically engage and to navigate the archives and the collection and to make that productive, that is something that is more or less new. And as Eike, you just mentioned from Frankfurt, that was the same situation in Hamburg. Is like there was no space for you to work. We had to create that studio. We had to create resources for you to be used. Also like the materials that you were asking for. And also what was very interesting to accompany is your way of asking to deal with the collection. So I mean, also like the museum, ethnographic museums have for a long time done a lot of collaborative projects, collaborative research projects where artists, but also researchers, experts of all sorts have been invited to engage with the collection, but not in a way like you also as a creative artist would use the collection as a resource to depart from there into a creative process. And this is something that's been new to the institution as far as I understand it. And so we had to figure out these processes, and there I want to draw a bridge to what you were mentioning about like working in this institution. And I had very strongly the idea that it's not possible for you to come into the institution and do your work without someone who is there to maybe translate or navigate or negotiate between your desires and also your needs and what the institution is usually ready to give. So I also had usually the idea that I have to be there because I was someone maybe to know the structures of the institution, and that was a very important point of our discussions usually, because then you said like, okay, I need this, can we do this? And I think, well, okay, how is the institution set up? How can we also be not disrespectful and disregardful towards maybe the needs and the rules that others in the institution are used to working with and maybe need to stick to for whatever their reason is, and then to get into a dialogue and see where we can get from here. So I think this was a bit also my task and my role as the curator in that project.
Yeah, and I think that's a key thing in curating, right? Is the care. The critique and the care are always running in tandem with each other. I don't think they can exist alone, but you also have to have quite a bit of backbone and also quite a bit of understanding of both needs, right? To navigate this terrain, because it's not so easy to navigate. And I think as a practitioner, you tend to get quite, it's an emotional investment that sometimes you realize on an institutional front may not be reciprocated in the same way as an institutional body. Yeah. And so that is I think we had good methodologies and I got the space that I needed in both frameworks, but it's labor, right? And it's often invisible labor. And I think also you have, situations where colleagues can't understand, what is this all about? I think there's also this idea of translation and what are you translating and what language are you deploying to translate for the other to understand this bridge. And maybe the mangroves is a nice image for that. Sorry, I'm jumping.
But I mean, but you were just also naming like the key aspect of the idea of hospitality, right? I mean, this idea of, the ability of hosting a person who behaves differently than the people or the domestic agency of an institution, because it's easier to host somebody or to invite somebody who shares your own way, for sure. But this is not the hospitality that we are naming, right? So, and also what I learned also through your residency at the Max Planck Institute was like that honest hospitality does not mean assimilation. So does not mean assimilation.
Yeah.
So it's not about making mimicry with the logics of the institution, but stay who you are with your needs and your requirements that you bring. And then it's then it's about the institution to react and to really like shape also the agenda according to your needs. I think this is what, if you want to show hospitality, then this is the only way you can do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I would like to add something that I think maybe is very special to the way you work, Syowia, or the way I have experienced it, and that also differs to other experience I might have made, is that although you entered the institution with a very, critical attitude, and that was also the task that was given to you to do that. But that was a critique toward like the structure, toward maybe the historical contexts, but not towards the people who form the institution. You were at every point very open and willing to also like negotiate your way and adopt whatever you've been asking for or your ideas to the realities of the people that like form the institution. Very often I witness that there's a lot of critique towards the system or the institution, and this is very harsh towards the people who today work there and maybe are the institution, maybe have to take responsibilities. But this can clash very hardly and very painfully. But this was never a situation I experienced with working with you, because we always were in a dialogue, and you were also willing to, step to the left and to the right and make it happen, because we somehow had the common goal to realize something very interesting. And so this is something I think also is a very important aspect why you could create what you actually did, and it was possible to happen in these spaces.
I think that's rooted in my desire for the artwork to be a vehicle for dialogue. it's always, and the dialogue is not easy. It's not comfortable. It's about stories that have been hidden, that have been covered, that have been obliterated. It's also about lots of violence that is sometimes recognized or unrecognized or ignored. So I think the underlying deep desire I have for my practice is that it's actually helping is the wrong word, but maybe facilitating conversations or potentialities of conversations or potentialities to see things in multiple ways, away from the singular. And maybe that's a nice entry point into the mangroves and rhizomatic systems and Glissant, who was a large part of my research influences in his essay Poetics in Relation, as well as in Stuart Hall, who was also one of the people I was kind of looking at and researching in this kind of process of Kaspale. I'm not sure if I need to track back a little bit and just explain, or if it has been explained, but Kaspale is a character I created to intervene inside of spaces or issues that are difficult to speak about or difficult to hear. And it's a tool I used with Mareike. We made a series of, so I'm going to do a little bit of backtracking. So there's I can jump back to this, remind me guys, because I think that thread is interesting. But like in the MARKK Museum, there's a very interesting room, which is the lecture room. It's a lecture room that was used pre-university time to teach ethnography and race classification. And I was kind of playing in there. And Kaspale was born out of the first image you saw with the mask, Wakonda mask, and a Kaunda suit mosquito netting kind of costume with red golden fingernails and red ochre, and both animalistic and human gender fluid joker trickster. And I played around in this room and created a body of work that was kind of came to fruition after the MARKK Museum exhibition. And Kaspale wasn't never supposed to be for the MARKK Museum specifically, an artwork that you would visit as an artwork. It was always a tool to intervene, and had to be that way because of the space of the fact that it's an ethnographic space and it's dealing with a history in Tanzania and kind of re-importing the story of that history. So with Mareike, we were, making postcards. So I had to produce something at the end of it all. And the lecture room series was not the correct kind of production to make in that stance. So collectively, I accessed two zoologists, Stuhlmann and Vossler, who took photographs in Amani in 1902 to 1904 in Tanzania, which is part of the MARKK Museum archive. I was allowed permission to use those images and reinsert Kaspale back inside of that archive and those images. And we created postcards and a series of questions together that were like, what do you think of this exhibition? Do you know about your colonial lineage? What do you think about the MARKK Museum in its totality? And those responses I actually received, and I can still, I'm still in touch with Barbara Plankenstein, I want to say, I'm bad, yeah, who's the director, who, we're still in contact, and I might still produce another body of work, which is a response to those cards, but that is still a long ongoing thing. It may or may not happen. And
let me quickly add to that, just to make this clear, is that we were so I at some point, because I had to curate also like the rest of the exhibition, and there were these historical photographs we were talking about, and the question was like, how can we bring these historical photographs into this exhibition that talks about the place, but we do not just want to reproduce and use the historical photographs. How can we make them? How can we add that critical or maybe that reflective, nuance to these photographs? And this was the only. We could do that through Kaspale. That was the solution that you offered. So this was also the way how we actually said, yes, that's the way we can bring these photographs into the exhibition without repeating.
Yeah. And I think the reason I pulled up the mangroves now, it's escaped me. Eike, you were talking about something. I think it's the systems and rhizomatic systems. I think, okay, so mangroves interest me a lot. One, because obviously they were part of origins, and the idea of where Kaspale comes from are mangroves, because I find them such a unique ecosystem. The trees living in water, the seed, you know, moves through fresh water and salt water, can float for up to, you know, a year before becoming, rooting itself and becoming the plant. The snorkely type parts you see actually flip and become the mechanism for breathing, for breath. They're murky. You can't really know where you're stepping when you're deep inside of mangroves. There's also Amilcar Cabral I found this out when I was at the Max Planck Institute. He had a school for resistance, a militant school for resistance that was positioned inside of mangroves because people couldn't access the mangroves. So the schools would take place in this space with high stools, so the tide would come and go, but your feet would still stay dry. So they're this very protective space that also needs protection, but also protects the land. And it's a whole ecosystem that without it, we'd be quite screwed up in the world. Also, I mean, my other desire was that it's only in the global south, but that's not true. It's you can also find mangroves in Florida. I was like, oh, shame. But, you know, I was trying to create this environment of where Kaspale comes from, and the origins piece has a kaleidoscopic element to it. So it's also otherworldly. But mangroves on another level, on a curatorial level, in terms of untethered magic and the space that we run, it's very much also about hidden and covert systems that are communicating in other ways that may not be easily explained to all, or may not necessarily be explained to all, but there's a communication system that is intricate and continuous and has a bridge-making philosophy behind it. It's also embedded in the land, and it functions in both this fresh, you know, water and land, and this dynamic, this kind, not juxtaposition, I don't know what I mean, but it's two different things that are needing each other to work, or multiple things that are needing each other to work. And I think in terms of hospitality and in terms of curating, you need a fluidity in gestation period that's long enough to support actual exchange, which is why I like this mangrove thing as well. And you need these multiple dialogues happening, and some are visible and some are quite invisible, and some are realized after the effects and some are realized when they're happening. I think a serendipitous moment for me was when Eike visited Kenya and went to a shop and had to, I don't know what you were buying, but you were like, man, 5 people. I ended up going to a shop and there was one person, another person, another person. And this one little thing I wanted to buy had to go through like 5 hands, and I had to pay money on this other end. And then I had to, you know, it took like forever. I don't understand it. But then there was an understanding as to like when we were working together for the work, and I was like, yeah, I have to buy the fabric. Oh, the elections came. A guy from Tanzania bought all the fabric. Now we have to look for it again. You know, there was all of a sudden, I felt like you are understanding a context that you were empathizing with, but not quite understanding. I just wanted to share that as well as a moment. I think it was nice for me to be like, he gets it now, yes. And maybe also to share about the influences that were there for you from experiencing untethered magic, because its framework is fluid but also firm, and it's a strange thing to try to explain.
Right. I mean, maybe one comment on the structure of the space, because more or less we have like 3 types of residencies on the table right now, right? I mean, in the museum, in the
that's true.
and like a self-designed through artists a residency space, which is not institutional, but like bottom up, or from design from scratch, but basically, but outgoing from like a certain artistic practice and approach and idea. So, but like there was one thing that really struck me from the beginning, is that the actual space was, I mean, it's like a space where, I mean, you live on the compound, but you also invite the guests on the compound. The kitchen is the core of the whole land. When you invite people, we meet in the kitchen, we cook dinner together, we cook lunch together. So it's really in an honest sense not regulated, or like only like slightly regulated space in terms of accessibility. So, which means that the guests that you're inviting are really have the status of like of an equal participant of the community.
Absolutely.
Which of course, I mean, it's also like the fluidity and the openness of the space is also because of the geographical location. It's always warm. You can have the doors open, so it's already like a system of like a very welcoming atmosphere. For sure, we cannot adapt this to Europe, like a German institution, but the idea of what is the status of the guest was something that I was really, that really is constantly on my mind after this experience. And then also like, I think it was mainly also like this, like soft power tools that you also introduced, this arrival time, for example.
Yeah.
So Syowia invited, there was like this UK collective performing borders in residence when I was there. And we had different workshops with Nairobi artists and like cultural workers. And so there was like this 1 hour before the actual workshop started as or 2 hours.
From 9 to 11.
Yeah, like an arrival time of getting to know each other on this, on an easy level, just have a chat, and then dive into the topic that you wanted to discuss on the day. So like this slightly little tools, I think, were very important also for me, curatorial, to understand, like just a different way of introducing a community and a discursive day.
Which I think for the German context, also this thing about, it's this time, everybody wants to know exactly what time and to be exactly on time.
Right.
Is culturally also very different, no?
And if you're giving an arrival time between 9 and 11, everybody will show up 5 to 11.
Yeah, you see.
And do some other work instead in the 2 hours before.
I thought people would arrive at 11, but actually people came quite early because they wanted to make breakfast together. Yeah, people used it. It was a test and it worked really well. I think the other thing that works very well for that time was that our workshop sessions have not consecutive in days. There was a workshop session 2 days without, and then the next day we'd regroup again. And that was it gave you time to think and ingest. Yeah.
But you're also right, like another aspect, this acquiring of sensibilities for local infrastructures and local production details was like highly important. Like also like working as a curator in Europe, and it was my first time on the African continent and my first time in like Kenya and Nairobi, and get to know this infrastructure that you showed me. And it's like, I think it was so important because the discourses also we are dealing with in Europe for like a certain time was now back up with a certain local knowledge, with an experience knowledge, which is so important to really also have sensibilities for further curatorial projects when engaging with various artists from, so to say, global south, or like in general, like globally. So, and also like, there was one moment when I say this, we were talking about like certain like terms of like cultural practices rooted in Kenyan culture in a certain community. And the question of how do we translate or how do we mediate this terms when coming to an art center in Europe without losing all the details and the philosophies maybe behind this term.
The nuances.
The nuances. So this kind of level of discourse was like so important, like curatorially, to understand and to be involved with, as like a set of tools how to engage with artists also differently in the future. And this means taking time,
Yeah.
and, for example, and
Yeah.
not rush, and not, this
Yeah.
is one big example, or one big lesson for me.
And something that happened with the Enkai exhibition with Don, I was I asked for both English and Kiswahili text in the exhibition, which they are actually going to continue with, which I think is absolutely fantastic. But in the process of translation, and I'm by no means a fluent Kiswahili speaker at all, but the translator, the word installation, I found so interesting. In Kiswahili, it's not a singular word, obviously, as most things aren't, similar to German in that sense. But the word for installation was, Don, you have to help me, the 5 senses. What was it, Don? Are you with us?
It was basically an artwork that uses different materials and stimulates all the senses.
Mm.
It was more sentiment, a description than a single word.
Yeah. So in the English language, in the arts scenario context, we've kind of reduced it to a singular word, installation, which actually leaves it quite vague still in one sense, especially if you're speaking to people who aren't in the art world. And I love that how the translation made me think, okay, that's how I'm going to be using my English definition is going to be that translated Kiswahili definition in English, and get away from using the word installation. I just wanted to share about the chairs. How much time do we have, Don? We can ramble forever, so you have to tell us. Oh shit, it's already 7.
It's 7, really.
Okay, so last story, then we open it up. What do you guys feel? There's lots we didn't cover.
Yeah, I think, and I think this is what you're going to do now is taking time. How Eike phrased it, I think, is something that was very important to all the different steps and all the different periods. For like the whole life of Kaspale and maybe the future life of Kaspale. I would love to hear from about that a little bit also. And it was also an important, so like the whole time spent also being in contact for quite some years now, and always, sharing thoughts and new approaches to old thoughts as well, but also the taking time in the moment when we were actually in the same place in the world, and taking the time, not only to work together, but also to stroll around, to chat, and let thoughts wander and exchange on whatever comes into our minds. So I think this is taking time is a bit a core issue of the relation that we're having.
Maybe I share the banana image. It makes the most sense.
I love it.
It's my favorite thing. So like at the moment, it has been my favorite thing for a minute. I took it in a supermarket in Rongai. I was kind of in looking for non-veggie stuff in a supermarket because I prefer to go to the market for the vegetables. And I saw this banana and I was like, oh, wow. Just the stitching is always in my practice as well. So I was drawn to it that way. But it's we have a lot of bananas imported from Kampala. And when the banana splits a little bit, the skin is revealing the actual fruit that you're eating. It can't get exported. Like the whole bunch is now no longer possible to export, right? And I love this banana fiber stitched together in order to transport. And I like to use this image so much as a metaphor about, I guess, new ways of, we have to find new ways to cultivate our ecosystem and to build our bridges and to make our borders like passable and fluid, and that there are solutions as well, that there's always solutions in play. And I just find this image helps me talk about that. Yeah. Shall I answer the question, Mareike, as well? Since no,
Not now.
okay.
May I say one more thing about the mangroves?
Totally.
No, because it's so interesting because you presented origins last year and with this like huge kaleidoscopic mangrove forest landscape as you framed it. But it's so interesting because I would say like this whole like thinking with and through the mangrove as a tool of like, and not only using it as a metaphor, but really using it as a tool to allow you to create new ontologies, to new ways of being, to understand language and meaning differently, is like really describing your entire artistic practice. So it's really like an origin for you as an artist, and not only for Kaspale. So it's really, and it's interesting because it comes at the end, but it's not the end. So it's really like also when I remember you being in the residence, I think it really also maybe also in consequence to the challenges that also the Institute had on you. Maybe this was really like also remembering where you're coming from.
Yeah.
What is the basis, right?
And kin, I think in the residency,
Right.
I reconnected with my ideas around kin. And kin, I think it was because I was feeling such a vacuum and lack of community and kind of, okay, that's not working. Right, let's find another way, get ready to run, and then bang, oh shit, that's not working. Okay, again, let's try another one, you know? It was like, oh, fuck's sakes. And so like, I was like, okay, so we created like film screening sessions in order as an entry, as a response to not getting to meet people enough. Let's do something quite informal and sharing films. And the first one was the Donna Haraway film about Earth, storytelling for earthly survival. Super great film, I love it. And you know, we kind of created a little mini kin inside of Frankfurt and inside of the Institute, and also beyond the Institute through these screenings of like a little group that would kind of regularly start to meet and engage and talk. So that method actually worked. Oh, I went off track. I'm sorry.
You were talking about kin.
Yeah. So, you know, many years before that, I think it was 2020, I just started the Kaspale work and had done the MARKK Museum, and I have a group called What the Hell's She Doing? It's a collective that I'm part of. Imi Mali's on the call. Whoop, whoop. She's a member, and Sonia E. Barrett and Usha Sidram, and we meet regularly. Nowadays, it's become monthly. In the very beginnings of our which was formed in 2019, it was kind of weekly. But the purpose of the collective is to also a support system. We're all mothers, we're all artists, we all work with very difficult historical material. We all have to navigate the framing of being other in the art industry. And this is kind of the basic foundation as to why we kind of meet and talk regularly. And their question to me was like, you know, who's around Kaspale? Is Kaspale alone in the work that they have to do? And that's when this kin ancestor started to develop, and it really got reinforced again in the Max Planck Institute. And I guess the output is with the ancestors in this sanctuary type space, but also a lot of people refer to the origins as spiritual or kind of like a shrine-like feeling, more so in the Nkai form of it, because it is so enclosed and you actually walk around into a center. Yeah. I think maybe the chairs could be nice. Don, how much time do we actually have?
Well, I think we had the 9 minutes we had before the Q&A have run out.
Okay, so let's pause there and just do a Q&A. if there is Q&A.
Okay. Well, thank you very much so far for you've been sort of taking copious notes. Thank you very much for this insightful conversation. I have a few questions I'd like to put to the group, to you three. And perhaps one is specifically, this is for you, Eike. We spoke about putting together the proposal for this residency that Syowia took part in. And I would be interested to if you could maybe speak a little bit about what that experience was like at the inception of this program, and perhaps how you've seen that evolve in the time that it's been in existence, with the different experiences you've had with the different artists or practitioners who've taken part in the program so far.
Right. Yeah. So I wrote the concept like in 2019, as I said. So as a response, because I started as a student assistant at the institute. I mean, I landed like randomly there, more or less. It was never planned to be at this institute, but you know, it happened, and I found out it's interesting to write a concept for an institute that is doing research on aesthetics, and to write a concept for a permanent like realm where artists can take place and really like react to the institute. So you know, there, as I said before, like there are 3 artists always coming for 3 months, and so they bring very different activities and approaches, and also like disciplines towards the institution that you always have to navigate according to that. So the 3 that were before Syowia were rather easy because they have like really electronic-based or computer-based practices, and also the requirements were more meeting also the idea or the logics of the institute, how scientists are working inside the spaces. And I would say, like with Syowia, it was like really like a turning point also for me, because I think in general, like artists coming to an institution that is hosting an artist in residence program these artists are introducing learning processes in terms of hospitality, because I didn't know what is a hospitality writer for a residency program. I didn't know. I was curious, and I was interested in giving an opportunity to artists in the frame of the residency program, but I had no clue what kind of set is needed. So, and I think with Syowia, it was really like a turning point in introducing actually the fundamental and basic ideas what a residency is. That's why I think also this ongoing collaboration is like so rooted, because we were talking so much about institutional infrastructures and challenges, that was really opening up. I think also the institution was really learning through that, even though we cannot change it immediately. It's more about like introducing a culture to give this to an institution, and then it has to learn with it. And as Mareike, you said, it's really about moderation, and really about somebody who is taking responsibility for this moderation between this bureaucratic infrastructure and someone who is coming with like a certain idea of working environments, but also with a certain cultural background, with a certain practice that needs to be navigated and moderated. So you are in a way also constantly an ambassador. But I think the institution learned, but I think honestly it's a long-term process, even though, especially when there is an institution that is not, you know, it's not designed to work with artists. It's, as I said in the beginning, it's aliens. It's like foreigners. Yeah.
We called it what? Institutional glow.
And I think, I mean, this is now a specific circumstance, but I think you can also scale it up to different institutions. And artist in residence program exists in so many contexts nowadays. It's an important factor in the art industry. So I think also to really understand different hospitality logics or hospitality ideas is something that we should all, keep in mind and discuss between like different institutional contexts.
Thank you. And just in keeping with the question of, navigating institutions, earlier today in sort of a few conversations that lead up to these, to this talk this evening, something that I believe, Mareike, you brought up this idea of extending conversations beyond the confines of the institution. So moving into, the context of the city, the coffee shops, and so on and so forth. And I think that's, in that sense, represents both kind of an expansion of the thinking and also the relationship. And I wondered whether you could speak a little bit about, how that sort of worked or played out when collaborating with Syowia on the work at the Hamburg Museum in Hamburg. I'm also curious to hear a little bit about some of the decisions that you sort of made in terms of presentation of the work, what kind of work to produce for certain spaces, and I think this may be a question that both of you could answer, one or the other. Mareike and Syowia.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the second half of your question? I'm sorry, I'm having some noises that come from somewhere. So it was, the first question was about like the wandering around, the actual work to be done, but what was the second question? Sorry, can you repeat that?
There's a develop, but then also sort of the thinking behind deciding what kinds of work or what kind of outputs make sense for a particular institution or particular kind of space. I'm also curious about this because I know in preparing the presentation, there was also a decision, I believe, that you made with Syowia to not, there's a certain image, and there was a decision that was made to not show that image. And so I'm also curious about, what are some of the things that are informing decisions? What's the thinking around this?
Whoa, yeah, big question. I'll try to be brief, just to leave space for other questions as well. So about the first thing is, as Syowia said in the beginning, as I was working for that museum, I was kind of given the task to be the person to welcome Syowia and to guide Syowia through the residency. I was not the person to set up the conditions for the residency. I also was not involved in like establishing the connection or choosing Syowia for the residency. I started working at the point when more or less Syowia came into the house. So fortunately, I would say, it was not very clearly defined what my responsibilities would be, what I have to do within the house. It was more or less, take care of whatever she needs. So, and that's from where we started. And I think of course, it also helped that we personally clicked quite quickly and quite well. But it's like, so being with Syowia during these days in the museum was not like a 9-to-5 job. Of course, there were days when we didn't meet, and so we met 3 days afterwards, and you showed me these fancy videos you took in the hallways, and I was like, I wasn't part of that, and I regretted it somehow. So we also worked separately, that's what I want to say. But then again, there were days when, like, we met early in the morning, and then we decided we'd rather go for a walk, and then let's have dinner, and maybe not, just directly concentrating on, okay, on what do you need, how do we get that, how do we solve that problem, but just also to know each other personally. To introduce to Syowia the way I experienced Hamburg, a city to which I was new myself. And then just, adding one thought to another, and also let thoughts and conversations flow more freely and not so very much directed. And interestingly, we always kind of got back to draw the circles and see, and then realize how what we were now talking about actually relates to what's been working in our heads for weeks. So just to allow also for that friendship, and that that stimulation vice versa in, you know, just drawing from our experience that also maybe stem from some completely different phases of our lives, and see how these actually inspire the moment where we are in right now. So maybe this and then you were asking about, well, the output. As I said, it was not very clear like how to go about with this residency, and also like, okay, there needs to be an output that needs to go into the exhibition, but like in which way, in which form, how big, and where exactly. This was things that we were open to negotiate, and this was very helpful, as Syowia emphasizes a lot, that for her it was helpful not to have like, oh, it needs to go there, you know, this like definitely where we need to arrive. And one thing about the image that we actually did not tackle that topic now, but there was another member of the collection, which is an ancestral figure, and it got into the discussion about the exhibition because the documentation within the museum relates it via the collector who brought that ancestral figure to the museum, and he used to be the director of that Amani Institute. So that was one of the approaches, one of the methods that I used in my working, is I researched the documentation in the museum to see what are the traces that lead the historical collection to that Amani place, and one of the ways was through biographies of persons that kind of, you know, left their imprint on the Amani Institute and also appeared like in the histories of the museum. And that's how we got to talk about this ancestral figure. And the interesting thing is that like from the way it's built, it has moving arms and moving legs. And I think this was one of the features that kind of also inspired Syowia when she was looking for someone like to create that character that can move, as you said earlier, in places and can speak in places where you can't. So this is at least a connection that I think is there. But then further down the road with that exhibition, we had another colleague from Dar es Salaam invited, a historian, and she pointed to us that she thinks it's very problematic to work with that and to show and to exhibit that ancestral figure because it's sacred. And of course, it's very problematic that that figure is in Hamburg and in the collection. And ever since we are in dialogue about that, and this is also something ongoing because as we are talking now, there's a group of researchers in southern Tanzania researching about the historical origins of that figure. And from there, starting the discussion, how, when, if, in what way shall we work, exhibit, talk about this figure in a museum or in exhibition or at all, or maybe not. And this is why we, even to say, I mean, the figure was shown in the exhibition, a decision that I wouldn't take that way today with the knowledge gathered ever since. And this is also why we decided not to include the picture in the selection today.
The blank screen, we were just going to describe what it looks like. But I think it also, in the very back of my mind, influenced Kaspale's puppet, which was created with a Kaspale's playground, the work that intervenes, well, doesn't intervene, sorry, that's not the right word. Kaspale's playground is about post-independent Kenya and the second president of Kenya's rule, and the building that is a government building that is where you get your passport and your immigration papers, identification papers, and the basement was a torture chamber for 24 years, if I'm not wrong. I don't know, Don. And that particular work is dealing with unpacking that time, because it was a time when I was it was conceived in my birth year and built by 1983. So thought of in 1979 and then actually built in 1983. And the first 24 years of my life were under Moy's rule. And we are, my generation and people who grew up in Moy's time, we have a autopilot self-censorship modus of operating in unpacking that. And Kaspale, you can't film there because it's a government building, you can't perform there. So Kaspale needed assistance from a puppet. So I think the puppet thought could have started its gestation back then, because I didn't like this. The object in the storage, when we were in the storage and I came across it, I was kind of always positioning my body at a not in direct view of it, but you know, the arms and the limbs coming off and being reattachable, I was very fascinated by. But then it was also like, no, this is a bit, yeah, too much. The MARKK Museum, I was dealing with masks and all sorts of other things, and in the Max Planck Institute, it was the institutional, it was like two polar, like tightrope walking spaces. Are there any other questions, maybe?
I don't believe so. Okay. I think that's all from us. I think I'd just like to say thank you very much. Thank you to Syowia.
Maybe I can then like quickly ask the question that I had and that we kind of not touched earlier, is like, what I liked a lot is you're working at the biography of Kaspale backwards, like working on and around and with Kaspale for quite some years to arrive at the origins. And so is origins the end of Kaspale?
No, it's funny. So primordials are new. So I've gone even further back. Maybe origins and primordial are similar in the way I'm relating about time with them, or with the language. Origins felt like a full stop, and having the solo show kind of feels like a full stop. But I think it's maybe a full stop in an ongoing, like there's another sentence coming. The ancestors are definitely continuing, because primordial happened, like I said, 3 weeks before the show opened. And they're these, so I create them by creating a hollow ball of clay first, or spherical, solid spherical thing, but it's hollow on the inside. Then I'm pushing, and the air is what is creating the crevices that are forming. And then I'm extending and building parts of the beginnings of Kaspale's ears, or parts of a face, but very, yeah, I don't know. And the word primordial clicked with me for that series, and it's just started. So that's a series that's going to continue. And for me, I'm paralleling primordial with origins. There's something very, I don't have the language for it. It's beyond past. It's not to do with past only, and it's also connected to kin, but I don't have a language formed around explain it properly yet. So that's happening for sure. Yeah, I don't know. And then these at the Kai exhibition, we also have a call out for people to create their own Kaspale, their own tool for speaking whatever they want to speak about. And that's been sent into the Inkai Instagram site. And on Friday, I'm planning to print those out. And I think printing them, I don't know, I feel like a little kind of a book of some sort, or some sort of thing is happening there. And then I'm super excited about this manifesto. So we're doing a manifesto dinner. I'm inviting a bunch of people to have an evening in the gallery, and we are collectively writing Kaspale's manifesto on a chalkboard. And I see the chalkboard and that manifesto as a collective product, but as a piece. And if the show travels, God willing, let's see, I would repeat this manifesto event in each place, and then have a series of these collective chalkboards of Kaspale's manifesto. And I have no idea what this manifesto will actually look like. It's a totally collective process, but I'm very excited about that too. So, but that's like, yeah, very, yeah, different. So that's what's happening.
Exciting. Looking forward.
Forward, yes.
Yeah.
And perhaps if I could say something just to add on to that, I think what's also been interesting with this exhibition and the work that is in the exhibition, but also then some of the things that have come out of the exhibition is it feels almost as though quite a bit of the work in the exhibition has really sort of allowed us to encounter different kinds of ways of Kaspale intervening in what is a kind of known history in a sense, more recent, but also more distant. But I think also some of the things that have happened, these activities such as, writing the manifesto, this thing of making your own Kaspale, but also an interesting thing that happened when we were installing the exhibition, and we had this sort of, so one facade of the space, sort of this wall with like open windows, and so it casts a very, where Origins is installed, and it casts very harsh light on the space, and it's supposed to be sort of a bit more subdued, quiet, enveloping space. And so the technician we were working with recommended, perhaps one could consider, cut out a couple of shapes, sort of different Kaspale shapes, and put them up on the windows, that now they cast shadows of Kaspale against, casting shadows of Kaspale into the space. And so it seems to me, it's almost as though now what next for Kaspale is this expansion of this universe of Kaspale. So Kaspale's kin expanding, and this shuttling between Kaspale's universe and our universe, and that sort of, the two becoming more and more involved. Because also even these ideas around Kaspale being this, being that sort of unbound by time and space. So I mean, certainly from my experience of this show, it seems like we are.
He's hung.
We
are. Say that
Mention.
You missed it.
No pressure, but yeah, I don't think we're seeing the last of Kaspale anytime soon.
And it's funny because in the process, Kaspale in the multiverse came up, and it's like a collage draft that never finished. And Nani is laughing so much. Why are you laughing, Karim? The tapestry is that, yeah, I'm thinking of tapestry in layers from that window experience, which is connected to the multiverse. But you guys can also always download the evolution of Kaspale. There's a map which is on the Enkai website in the, I don't know where, Dawn can share it, but it's a map you can actually download that shows you the evolution of Kaspale, and that Kaspale in the multiverse is in there as a hey, this started but never went anywhere.
But I think it's also
Karim, I want to know why you're laughing. You're on mute.
I don't think Kaspale needs a multiverse.
Okay.
I think the multiverse is just something for things that need it. I mean, it's a fantastic invention that is, as Don Handa said, it's unbound by time or space. So that's why I was laughing about the multiverse.
Okay. Yeah. I hear you. Yeah.
But could I add something?
Yeah.
Yes, Margaret.
Sure.
I was going to say that there's a weird universe of parallel universes, and we've seen a number of creative projects where there's another pop-up of you discover that you have another identity. It's yourself, but you're in a different universe, and you're a different being, and you have it's like, is this your twin? No, it's got somebody completely, but they look just like you, and they got some, I don't know, I mean, it's just a concept about another possibility for where Kaspale might venture, into you know, Star Wars kind of science fiction. She is doing a whole, you know, as you say, multi-generational, multicolored, so a multi-universe. You might find that there's a leapfrog into discovering who this other identity and universe is. That's all. Just a thought.
I missed some of the beginning of that, but
oh no, I was just saying that you know, I've seen some of these science fiction concepts of quantum universes.
yeah,
So there's another parallel universe.
Yeah, and everything is an illusion.
Yeah. Well, no, it's not an illusion.
Well, in quantum physics, we don't know what we're looking at, do we? We want to go there because the minute they observed it, everything is changing, right?
Right, right. Yeah. Well, that's what Kaspale is also changing. Yeah. Anyway, that's a thought.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think there's just one more question there, and then I think we're going to wrap up. Someone would like to know, is there any possibility of experiencing Kaspale's manifesto once it's written?
Say that again, Don. I was busy putting hearts in people's comments.
Is there a possibility of experiencing Kaspale's manifesto once it's written?
Oh yeah, I hope so. I think so. I think that's going to be like a whole other. Yeah, I think there's a physical sculpture in my mind with the chalkboard and that kind of stuff as a sculptural object, but there's also definitely a book kind of form. And hey, we have a whole catalog to produce. But I don't think it's a catalog that I'm thinking of in that sense. Yeah, but I feel like it, yeah. Maybe it's even something that keeps on traveling and being added to in a sense as well. I don't know.
Okay. Well, it's been an hour and a half, so I think we can stop here. Given time, clearly we could go on for much longer. Thank you so much to Syowia. Thank you, Eike. Thank you, Mareike, for your time this evening, for this wonderful conversation. Thank you to everyone who joined in the conversation, for listening, for sending in your comments and your questions. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. We recorded the conversation, so we will be putting it up online in the coming weeks. So if you didn't get a chance to see it, or you'd like to revisit it, it will be there. And for those of you in Nairobi who might be in Nairobi before 30th of June, you still have a chance to see Kaspale, and it's an unmissable experience.
And the performance, Summer?
Yes, and the performance on the 17th of June, this Saturday, Kaspale's Syowia will be performing Kaspale's Playground at Nkai. And with that, I think let's close off the evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.